Another character in Season 4 of Strive, and another character with the decrease in their defense modifier value, thus making it so that they take less damage. In the previous patch, Leo Whitefang took 103 from the sequence. This is what he takes in the current patch. 97. So, again, a change in the character's health that does result in him being slightly more tanky than he was before. Very much in line with what we've seen so far with pretty much the entire cast at this point. Let's talk about one of the biggest changes to Leo Whitefang in this patch, and that's going to be to his mobility. Previously, if you held down back while you did his forward dash, the animation wouldn't stop, meaning that Leo would travel the full distance of his dash while being able to block anything the opponent threw out. This meant that Leo had some great ways of closing in the gap against opponents that wanted to fight him at longer ranges, and for him being such a close-range fighter, this was honestly a great tool to have. With proper execution, you could consistently gain ground against matchups that wanted to zone you away while being completely safe during it. This contrasts with the mobility from other characters that use a dash-style movement, like Giovanna, for example, who stops whenever she does hold a down-back input, meaning that if you want to cover more distance, you have to not block. Leo didn't have that weakness before. But now, if you dash forward and hold down back, Leo will break. This means that he no longer has safe movement option selects where he's able to close a lot of distance against the opponent. If you want the full dash animation to play out, you have to not hold down back, meaning that you put yourself at risk for getting poked. And if you want to safely approach the opponent, now you're going to be cutting your momentum down. Obviously, this is still pretty decent movement for him, but now he's more in line with other close-range characters. And again, when you look at the difference in the situations that I have here, you see just how much of an impact this has on Leo's ability to get into a matchup. Whereas before we were able to pretty much consistently gain ground on Axel, now we're only gaining a little bit of ground each time because Leo is stopping earlier because I'm holding down back in order to block the 2P spam. Obviously, this isn't a true match demonstration because what Axel player is just going to do 2P over and over again, but it's there to illustrate the point that Leo's going to have a slightly harder time of being able to consistently close the gap against the opponent that's zoning him. As part of a universal nerf to 6Ps overall, Leo 6P sees one nerf, which is increased recovery. I'll go ahead and play the two side by side, as I'm sure most of you are used to by now. As you might expect, this means that in neutral, if Leo whiffs this, there's more of an opportunity for the opponent to actually get a whiff punish onto him for using this. In line with other invincible DPs that we've seen in this patch, Leo's / Eisensturm can no longer be cancelled into an overdrive during its startup. This is a pretty difficult Kara cancel to do in the previous patch since you had to go from a charge down up release input into his overdrive input. So I'm not sure how actually match viable it was, but theoretically speaking, you could wake up with this invincible DP, go into your overdrive instead then, which was still invincible as well, and then make it safe with a Roman cancel afterwards if you had 100% tension gauge. This is just making sure that Leo can't use this invincible option and then make it safe by any means necessary, as well as probably getting rid of some other unintended tech because of it. The final hit of Leo's heavy Eisensturm has been adjusted a bit. There's less horizontal distance now. Before, the opponent was a little far away from Leo, but within perfect range for him to get a cross-up Zweites. Let's take a look at the current blowback. As you can see, Asuka is a lot closer to Leo Whitefang, but the functionality remains the same because of the change to Zweites in this patch. Zweites had its movement speed decreased. In the previous patch, this was a fairly fast option, meaning that Leo Whitefang could use this in order to gap close against the opponent and sometimes catch them with a cross-up at far ranges. This old movement speed also meant that Leo would be able to get cross-subs at far distances if the opponent was trying to push him out with something like stand block faultless defense. In the current patch, the movement speed has been decreased. This doesn't mean that the move is slower in startup and is therefore more reactable. It simply means that Leo Whitefang doesn't travel as far, making it a less belligerent neutral tool option, as well as limiting the ranges which he's actually able to get cross-ups. As you remember in the previous patch, that sequence was able to cross up before and give Leo back turn stance pressure, but now that sequence keeps Leo on the same side, so he's no longer able to threaten that pressure from that block string when the opponent does that standing FD. As sort of a means to compensate for this, they did make adjustments to his Turbulenz, which before really had small knockback on block. This meant that Leo, after going into this move, which would be able to let him go into stance before, was usually spaced close enough for the opponent to get a punish on him. But now, the knockback on Turbulenz has been dramatically increased, meaning that usually Leo Whitefang is safe from the opponent's attempt to punish him for going into stance by using Turbulenz. This kind of reroutes the way that Leo wants to use his block string pressure. Instead of going for the cross-ups in some situations with Zwites, instead he'd rather safely end his pressure with Turbulenz here and then have access to his back stance normals, which has seen several buffs. One thing that is worth noting is that the only way for you to guarantee a punish on Leo is to instant block Turbulenz. So there is going to be a bit of disparity between players who are good at this matchup and who are bad against it, as well as able to consistently perform this instant block within a match-like situation. If you are fighting someone who is good at doing this, then it's going to be crucial for you to vary the timings in which you try to go for Turbulenz. Arxis has stated in the patch notes that they wanted to make Leo stronger when his back is turned, thus incentivizing players to use it as more than just like a mix of Vortex Gallery, but be able to possibly have some other implications for the character as well. Let's take a look at how they've started to do these things by looking at the changes to its dash behavior. For starters, in the previous patch, if you dash forward, you weren't able to cancel into normals until the end of the recovery. So that meant that there was not really great ways for Leo to approach with this option, thus making it so that usually in neutral, he faced you with his front. Now, you can cancel his dash into normals. This means that there's a little more effective range for these moves. So Leo's able to get in with his offense and be a little more threatening from neutral. There's also some implications to his combo routing as well because of this, as well as Oki setups. One thing the patch notes does remind people, though, is that if you dash through the enemy and go for a normal, Leo doesn't magically turn around, giving you unreactable crossups. As you can see, Slash will still go on the original side, so they made sure to future-proof this from being completely broken. Still, though, Leo does have access to fast dash canceling options. So it's not like you're not going to be dealing with some of this left-right pressure against the character. It's just going to be limited to some of his lighter normals like kick.
Danger.
Again, to emphasize the potential usefulness of this stance in neutral, Arc System Work gave brief strike and throw invincibility at the startup of his backdash and back turn. So just be on the lookout for that one, where Leo could potentially use this to read a throw and be able to escape it. Or a strike. As one example for some back turn combos that are now possible, here's Shrek for Xbox demonstrating the ability to break the wall off of back turn kick anywhere on screen. There's plenty of other context for Leo Whitefang to be using such routes like this as well when it comes to other confirms. There's tons of possibility for confirms here, which I think help to make Leo Whitefang a little more saucy when it comes to the way that he confirms his combos, as well as giving Leo players a way to express themselves. You could either cycle through all of your knockdowns into just running the same mix-ups again and again, or you can go for a higher damage playstyle that uses back turn stance. I think it's going to depend on the context and the situations overall, but this deepens the level of play that Leo has available to him in a way that I think is interesting. Also, I think it's absolutely sick that the community seems to have taken to calling these particular combo routes with Leo moonwalk combos, and y'all should call it that as well. All of Leo's back stance normals have seen two universal changes to them. The first one is a little more technical to explore, so I'll try to break it down as well as explore some of the tech that does exist for the character. The startup of all of his back turn stance attempts can no longer be canceled into other actions. And I think what this is targeting an OS that could have been used previously, where Leo could go for one of these options, and if the opponent woke up with a reversal of some kind, Leo would be able to cancel the startup into his counter. That no longer exists. However, it doesn't mean that Leo is not able to go for setups where he's able to react to the opponent's reversal and then go for a counter option. With the ability to cancel his dash into normals, Leo gets access to some new Oki options that allow him to see the opponent's reaction onto the Oki and make decisions accordingly against it. It's not quite an option select that what we saw previously with Leo, but it is still something that's impotent and important to know when you're fighting the character. Neos AZ is posting quite a bit of tech about this. Let's take a look at this sequence. Effectively, what they're demonstrating here is that off of that particular knockdown, a dash forward cancel into back turn kick is able to actually be safe against supers on wake up because you're able to recover from that kick and then do the dust counter. It's not like we're canceling the startup of the kick into the counter. We're having the kick recover before the end of it, and there's many places where Leo can use this within his kit that I'll demonstrate soon. But let's go ahead and take a look at how the other situation can play out. As you can see, you can confirm into a counter hit. And again, canceling and dealing with the Mortabato is pretty effective and easy. Now, if you look at his inputs, they're not doing the same inputs every time, so it's not an option select. They're simply just able to see the situation and be able to be in a place where they're able to choose between going for the counter or following up on a confirm. So I think this is pretty strong and overall healthy because the Leo player, at the very least, has to see the situation and make the right input. One situation where this is applicable is off of Leo's forward throw. The timing is a little bit tight, so if you're a bit slow on going for the dash back turn kick, you will get blown up by the super. So there is some skill required to execute this, but it's not incredibly difficult to do. A little bit of practice, and you should get consistent at this. One thing to note is that this isn't quite match practical against an invincible DP because you don't have the super flash to see and then just mash dust on reaction. If you try to run your offense or anything like that, the DP is going to hit you. You have to hard call it out. Which I think is a bit fair. Leos has the option to make this an option in a read, but if the opponent guesses right, Leo's just whiffing counter in their face and is going to get punished for it. I think this is nice because it encourages more interaction and hard reads from both sides. Now that we're done with that tangent, let's go ahead and talk about the other direct change to all the back turn stance normals, which is going to be increased to all their damage. In the previous patch, punched at 22, slashed at 21, kicked at 18, and heavy slashed at 31 damage. For the current patch damage, punched as 29, slashed as 27, kicked as 23, and heavy slashed as 40 damage. So substantial increases on all sides, meaning that Leo is more effective when he's mixing you from this stance, as well as it being able to use these normals and combos means he's able to sprinkle in a little more damage as he's going to be moonwalking on you. To make his counter during his back turn stance a little more rewarding at range, they made it so that if you don't trigger the full animation that leads to damage, Leo will be able to dash cancel it, closing the gap against the opponent. This again incentivized Leo to make reads in neutral and getting some rewards for it as opposed to just completely stopping the opponent's offense. Again, something I think is pretty cool to see. Just to make people aware, Leo currently is one of the characters that's affected by a couple of bugs in the Season 4 patch. Namely, when he's in his back turn stance, some of his cancels into special moves are behaving unintendedly, where he's not actually able to cancel into some special moves. In the previous patch, I'll demonstrate his ability to cancel into White from a back turn punch pretty consistently. This is intended behavior. If I do these same inputs and timing to buffer out these White special cancel from back turn punch, I don't get the special move. Instead, I get heavy slash. This is just a bug that you should be aware of. Arc System Works has stated that they will fix this within the month of November, so we shouldn't have to wait too long for Leo to behave properly again. To further incentivize some other options in back turn stance, we see a couple other damage buffs. His command throw, Glanzendes Dunkel, if my German is even remotely accurate in terms of pronunciation, has had its damage increased. In the previous patch, it did 78 damage. As for the new patch, it does 105 damage now, a pretty substantial increase. Blitschlag also had its damage increased. In the previous patch, it would do 48. And now it does 61 damage, so a moderate damage increase. His back turn super, Stahlwirbel, also has an increase in damage. It did 112 damage in the previous patch. Now it does 135 damage. Leo will appreciate the buffs, and again, this falls in line with improving the overall effectiveness of his back turn stance in terms of damage. Leo's been a strong character for a while in Guilty Gear Strive's top-level metagame, and I feel like that's going to be something that is going to remain the case going forward in Season 4. He has a few new tools to play with overall when it comes to his back turn stance, making him a little more effective once he's able to get into the opponent. However, I also can't understate enough just how dramatic the nerf to his dash is in this patch, as there's some high-level Leo players speculating that it completely skews matchups that were slightly favorable for him and now make them unfavorable because he's going to be unable to get as close to the opponent as consistently as he was before. Leo might not be a character that you can fully solo main in this patch, but he's certainly a strong character to main with some competent secondaries to cover bad matchups for him. While he'll struggle against some zoner-type characters a little more, once he gets in, he's going to be able to be just that much more deadly, while also being one of the cooler characters in terms of the look of his combo routes, I think, in this game. We'll see overall what's going to happen with Leo going forward, but we're already seeing that even while bug, there's high-level players making top-level results for him in online events such as Tampa Never Sleeps.